It was late afternoon, and I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak behind me. I turned around and saw Alden standing in the doorway, staring at the object in my hands. My heart stopped. How could I explain this? The item was anything but innocent, a large, brightly colored toy, something no polite conversation could ignore. I had taken it out of the drawer to dust behind the cabinet, not thinking much of it. I thought I had locked the door, but apparently not. Alden, my 23-year-old stepson, wasn't supposed to be home yet. He worked at a local brewery and usually stayed out late with friends after his shifts, but there he was, tall and lean, his dark hair falling into his amused blue eyes. "What's that?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and teasing. My face turned bright red. I dropped the item as if it had burned me and quickly grabbed the first thing I could find, a throw pillow from the bed, to cover it. "It's none of your business," I stammered, my throat tightening, but his expression didn't change. If anything, he leaned against the doorframe, his curiosity only growing. You don't have to act so embarrassed," he said with a small smirk. "It's not like I haven't seen something like that before." I wanted to disappear into the floor. The nerve of this kid, no, man, standing there so casually, completely unfazed, while my world seemed to crumble. I forced a nervous laugh, trying desperately to shift the attention away from me. "Alden, seriously, go mind your own business," I stammered, my heart racing. "You shouldn't even be in here." But he didn't move. The silence between us grew heavy, almost suffocating. He wasn't looking at the pillow in my hands anymore. His gaze was fixed on me, and it was different, no longer the usual laid-back or playful looks I was used to. This one lingered far too long, too intently. It was as if he'd peeled back a layer of the person he thought I was and found something else entirely. I felt a strange sensation, a flicker of warmth deep in my chest, followed by a sharp pang of guilt. This was wrong. Whatever this was, it was absolutely wrong. I was his stepmother, for God's sake. I was married to his father. I shook my head, desperately trying to break the tension. "Please, Alden, just go," I said, my voice shaky. He finally shrugged, lifting his hands in mock surrender. All right," he said, his tone light again. But before he left, he gave me one last look, a look that set my already unsettled thoughts into overdrive. It was subtle, but the way his gaze lingered on me sent a ripple of unease through me. As the door closed behind him, I sank down on the edge of the bed, still clutching the pillow to my chest. My heart was racing. I couldn't even bring myself to put the toy back into the drawer. It felt as though something invisible had shifted in the air between us, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I knew I'd never see Alden the same way again. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the moment from my mind. I tried to focus on other things, cooking dinner, folding laundry, and even sitting next to Victor on the couch while he flipped through old westerns on the TV. But Alden's face, that amused smirk, and the unsettling glint in his eyes haunted me. Victor barely noticed my distraction. That was nothing new. He had been wrapped up in his hobbies for years now: gardening, woodworking, crossword puzzles. Since his retirement, he'd found solace in his routines. I didn't resent him for it. That would have been unfair. It was just how things had been. But tonight, I couldn't seem to escape the swirling thoughts about Alden. Too easy, but sometimes I felt more like a living caretaker than a wife. I glanced down the hall and caught Alden's shadow moving around in his room. I could hear the faint hum of music coming through his door, a low bass line that didn't match the quiet stillness of the rest of the house. My heart jumped for no reason I could justify, and I quickly turned my attention back to Victor. Victor was snoring softly, his chin tilted down toward his chest. He'd fallen asleep in his recliner again, the TV still droning on in the background. I thought about waking him, but what would be the point? Instead, I stood and wandered into the kitchen, grateful for a moment of solitude. But I wasn't alone for long. Alden walked in, his bare feet making little sound against the hardwood floor. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled like he'd just run his hands through it. "Hey," he said casually, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water. "You're up late," I said, keeping my tone light. He smiled, leaning against the counter. "Just unwinding, you know? It's not like I have to be anywhere early. Easy being under this roof sometimes." The comment made me pause. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. "It's nothing, just living here again. I guess I feel like I don't fit anymore." I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. "It's just temporary, Alden. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You'll land on your feet." "Thanks, Molina," he said, his voice quieter now. "I appreciate that." For a moment, we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking, even though neither of us moved. His eyes lingered on mine, and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself with wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But Alden wasn't finished. "About earlier," he started, his tone turning playful again. "You don't have to be embarrassed, you know. I mean, we're all human, right?" My hand froze mid-wipe, and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. "Alden, let's not talk about that," I said, my voice tight. "That's all right, it was an accident and it's not worth bringing up again," Alden said, raising his hands in surrender. But there was a teasing edge in his smile that made my stomach flip. He walked past me then, close enough that I caught a faint whiff of his cologne. I didn't turn around, but I could feel his presence behind me for a moment before he finally left the kitchen. That night, as I lay in bed next to Victor, my mind raced. What was happening to me? To us? To this house? I'd always been able to maintain clear boundaries, lines that weren't meant to be crossed. But Alden had a way of bending those lines, even when he wasn't trying to. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I prepared breakfast like I always did: eggs, toast, and coffee for Victor, a smoothie for myself. Alden was the last to come into the kitchen, as usual, his hair still damp from a shower. He greeted Victor with a casual morning, and me with a warm smile that made my pulse quicken. The three of us sat at the table, the clinking of silverware and soft chatter filling the air. Occasional snippets of conversation filled the air, but underneath it all, I could feel the tension. Every time Alden's hand brushed mine as we passed the salt or refilled coffee, it felt deliberate. I caught him watching me more than once, his gaze steady and unreadable. Victor, of course, noticed none of this. After breakfast, Alden offered to help me clean up. Normally, he would have disappeared into his room or gone out with friends, so his offer caught me off guard. "You don't have to," I said, stacking plates in the sink. "I want to," he replied, already grabbing a dish rag. We worked in silence for a while, but the air between us felt charged. At one point, I reached for a glass at the same time he did, and our hands collided. Neither of us pulled away immediately. "You're different," he said quietly, his voice just above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know, you don't act like other women your age." I laughed nervously, stepping back to create some distance. "Well, that's flattering. It's not just that," he continued, his voice softer now, yet more intense.